Tonight the stones are still warm, where the sun touched them, and the dark has settled in, the way it does in high places, completely and without apology. I'm your host. This is Tales After Midnight, where we tell the old stories in the old way, slowly, in the dark, until you're somewhere else entirely. Tonight, we're in Mesoamerica. 9 stories from the Aztec, the Maya, and the traditions that grew from them, told by civilizations that built cities larger than London, and calendars more accurate than Rome's, and believed, deeply, that the world was made from violence and runs on debt. A woman who has been crying by the river since before the Spanish arrived. A death bat in the underworld that takes the heads of the impatient. A creature in the water with a human hand on its tail. A witch who leaves her legs behind. A beautiful spirit beneath a tree that will kill you if you follow her. Forest guardians who will steal your soul if you don't ask permission. A shapeshifter who is also your healer. The monster whose body became the earth. And the road the dead walk for 4 years through 9 levels to find rest. Make yourself comfortable. Turn down the lights if they're up. You don't need to stay awake for this. Let the stone cool. The stories will carry you wherever you need to go. Before anyone in Mexico City spoke Spanish, before the cathedral was built on the temple's bones, before the conquest, before the horses and the gunpowder and the cross, there was a sound that moved through the streets of Tenochtitlan at night. A woman crying. Not inside a house, not behind a wall, in the open, in the dark, moving along the canals that ran through the city like veins, carrying the sound of grief from one end of the island to the other. The Aztecs knew who she was. They called her Cihuacuatl, the serpent woman, goddess of motherhood and midwives, and the terrible passage between carrying a child and setting it down in the world. She was dressed in white. She carried what looked like a cradle, and when people found the courage to look inside it after she had passed, they found a flint knife. Not a child. A blade. The Florentine Codex, the great encyclopedia of Aztec life, compiled by the friar Bernardino de Sahagún in the decades after the conquest, records her cry. Not the words exactly. The sound. A wailing that moved through the streets like weather, that people heard from their sleeping mats and understood without needing to be told that something was wrong with the world in a way that could not be fixed by mourning. "My children," she cried, "where shall I take you?" This was before the Spanish arrived, before the city fell, before the temples were pulled down and the stones used to build churches. Cihuacuatl's crying was an omen, one of 8 signs the Aztecs recorded in the years before the conquest. She knew what was coming. She was mourning in advance. Centuries passed. The city changed its name and its language and the shape of its buildings and the names of its gods. But the crying didn't stop. By the time the colony was settled, by the time Spanish had replaced Nahuatl in the streets, and the canals had been drained, and the lake the city sat on had been pushed back to the edges, the story had changed shape too. Now she was a woman, not a goddess, just a woman, beautiful, poor, living in a village on the outskirts of the city that had grown up on the ruins of Tenochtitlan. The story didn't just change shape, it multiplied. Every region of Mexico has its own La Llorona. Different details, different settings, different sins. In some, she killed the children in a rage. In some, she killed them to punish the man. In some, she killed them because a voice from the water told her to, and she was too broken by then to refuse. The variation doesn't weaken the story. It strengthens it. A legend with one version is a story someone wrote down. A legend with 1,000 versions is something that actually happened. Not once, not to one woman, but over and over, in the places where poverty meets betrayal and the river is close. Her name changes depending on who tells it. Maria sometimes no name at all, just the woman by the river. In some versions she was indigenous, in some she was mestiza, in some she was a noblewoman fallen on hard times. The version doesn't matter as much as the shape. A woman who loved a man who did not love her the same amount. He was wealthy. He came to her when it suited him and left when it didn't. She bore him children. 2, in most versions, sometimes 3. And for a while the arrangement held. The children grew. She loved them with the concentrated love of a woman who has staked everything on her family, because the world has not given her anything else to stake it on. Then he married someone else. A woman of his own class, a proper marriage, announced in church, celebrated by his family, sealed in ways that everything he had done with the woman by the river had never been sealed. He came to tell her himself, or he didn't come at all, and she heard it from someone in the market, depending on the version. Either way, the information arrived like a blade, placed carefully against the thread that had been holding her together. What happened next is the part of the story that everyone knows and no one tells well. Because what happened next is not a single event. It's a collapse. A woman standing by a river with 2 children and a mind that has come apart along lines that were already there, stressed beyond repair by poverty and abandonment and the particular cruelty of being discarded by someone who never intended to keep you. She took the children to the river. She drowned them. The river took them quickly. That is the only mercy in this story, that the water was fast and the children were small, and whatever they experienced was brief. The river is not cruel. The river is a river. It does what water does. It was the woman who chose the water as the instrument, and the river accepted the children the way it accepts everything, without judgment, without memory, without hesitation. She stood on the bank and watched the water close. And in that moment, not the moment after, not the moment of regret, but the moment itself, the moment when the last ripple flattened and the surface became ordinary again, something happened inside her that can only be described as a permanent rearrangement. And then she understood what she had done. Not gradually, not over hours or days, immediately. The way a person standing at the edge of a cliff understands gravity in the instant after their foot leaves the rock. Total, irrevocable. The kind of knowledge that arrives with a sound she made then, that she has been making ever since. She died there, by the river. Some versions say she drowned herself. Some say she died of grief, which is the same thing said differently. Some say she simply stopped, the way a clock stops. Not broken, just no longer willing to move forward. She was refused entry to the afterlife. Not Mictlan, that was the Aztec underworld, and by the time this version of the story was being told, the afterlife had been renamed Heaven, and the rules had changed. She was told she could not enter until she brought her children. So she went back to the river, and she has been there ever since. La Llorona, the weeping woman. She walks the rivers and canals and irrigation ditches and storm drains and any place where water moves through the dark. She walks in Mexico City and in Guadalajara and in small towns in Oaxaca and along the Rio Grande and in East Los Angeles and in San Antonio and in Chicago. She has traveled farther than any conquistador. Sometimes she appears as a beautiful woman, seen from behind, her white dress catching the moonlight, her hair loose and long, and the man who follows her, because someone always follows, finds that when she turns around, there is no face. Or her face is a skull. Or her face is his mother's face. Or his daughter's. Or the face of someone he has wronged and has been trying not to think about. Sometimes she doesn't appear at all. She is only the sound, a wailing that seems to come from every direction, and then from none, from inside the listener's own chest, as if the grief had always been there, and the woman in white merely gave it permission to be heard. Her cry is the thing people report first, before they see her, before they know the story. A sound like a woman in unbearable pain, moving along the water, getting closer or getting farther away, but never stopping. Ay, mis hijos. Ay, mis hijos. In rural Mexico, children are still warned away from rivers at night. La Llorona will get you, their mothers say, and the warning works, because the mothers believe it too. There are people alive today who will tell you, calmly, without embarrassment, that they heard her, not as folklore, not as tradition, as a sound they heard by a river at night and could not explain. The sound predates the story. Cipactli was crying before La Llorona had a name. The goddess and the ghost are the same grief, wearing different centuries. The colonial version added the drowned children and the faithless man, and the Catholic refusal of heaven. But the core, the wailing, the white dress, the waterways, the feeling that something wrong has been set loose in the structure of the night, That was here before the Spanish, and it will be here after whatever comes next. Some scholars connect her to La Malinche, the indigenous woman who translated for Cortés, who bore him children, who was abandoned when she was no longer useful. That reading makes La Llorona a story about the conquest itself, about Mexico's indigenous soul betrayed by a European lover and left weeping by the water for what was lost. Maybe. Or maybe she's older than any reading. Maybe she's just what grief sounds like when it doesn't have anywhere else to go. The rivers are quiet now. The mist is settling. If you hear something, it's just the water. Probably. The Maya believed the earth had a mouth. Not a metaphor. Caves, cenotes, the sinkholes that open without warning in the limestone of the Yucatan. These were entrances, doorways, the places where the surface world dropped into what was underneath. Underneath was Xibalba, the place of fear, the Maya underworld ruled by the lords of death, populated by every terrible thing that lives below the reach of sunlight. The Popol Vuh tells the story of the hero twins, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who descended into Xibalba because the lords of death had killed their father, and they wanted him back. Their father had been a ball player. He played the ball game, the great Mesoamerican sport, rubber ball, stone court, stakes that went far beyond sport, because the ball game was not entertainment. It was cosmology. The ball was the sun. The court was the boundary between worlds. To play was to reenact the movement of the cosmos, and to lose was to be sacrificed. The lords of death had been annoyed by the sound of the ball game overhead. They summoned the father down to Xibalba and killed him there, and hung his head in a calabash tree as a warning and as decoration. The head spoke to a passing maiden. She became pregnant, and from that impossible union, a girl and a skull in a tree, the hero twins were born. They grew up. They learned to play the ball game. They were loud about it, and the lords of death, annoyed again by the same sound from the same family, summoned them underground. Xibalba is not hell. It's worse than hell, in a way, because hell at least has a logic. You did something wrong, and now you're punished. Xibalba has no interest in justice. The lords of death don't care what you did. They care whether you can survive their tests. The tests are houses. 6 houses, each one a trial. Each one designed not to be fair, but to be survived through cleverness and luck, and the particular kind of courage that comes from knowing you're going to die here unless you think of something the gods didn't anticipate. The dark house, where there was no light, and you had to keep a torch and a cigar burning through the night without using them up. The razor house, where the walls were made of obsidian blades that moved on their own. The cold house, filled with hail and wind that could freeze you standing. The jaguar house, packed with starving jaguars. The fire house, all flame and no exit. The twins survived each one. They were clever. They talked to the ants, and the ants carried flowers for their offerings. They bargained with the cold and burned old logs instead of their torches. They outwitted the lords of death at every turn, using the one resource the gods hadn't accounted for: the stubbornness of sons who will not abandon their father. And then they came to the house of bats, the sixth house, the last trial, the one that broke them. The ceiling was high enough to disappear. The darkness inside was not the darkness of a room without light. It was the darkness of something that eats light, that was dark before there was a word for it, that had been dark since the beginning of the world and intended to stay that way. And the dark was full of bats. Not the bats that fly through a summer evening, catching mosquitoes and making that small, papery sound with their wings. These were the death bats. Camazotz. Creatures with snouts like obsidian blades that could cut through anything they touched. Not by biting, but by passing. The way a razor passes through skin before the skin knows it's been opened. The twins had one defense: their blowguns. They climbed inside them, curled their bodies into the hollow tubes and waited there in the dark, breathing the stale air inside their own weapons while the death bats circled above them, all night long. They lay there, curled like seeds, their knees pulled to their chests, their breathing shallow, trying to take up as little space as possible in a world that was trying to find them. The blowguns were not comfortable. The Popol Vuh doesn't say this explicitly, but it doesn't need to. You can feel it in the telling. The claustrophobia, the way the darkness inside the tube was a different kind of darkness from the darkness outside it, and both kinds wanted them dead. The sound. That's what the Popol Vuh emphasizes, not what the bats looked like, but what they sounded like. The shrieking, the leathery rush of wings, the click of those blade snouts passing close enough to feel the air move, but not close enough to cut. All night, hour after hour, in total darkness, inside a tube with no room to move and nothing to do but listen. Near dawn, the sound changed. The shrieking slowed. The wings settled. The dark grew quieter in the way dark does just before the light returns. Hunahpu, the elder twin, the braver one, the one who always moved first, decided to look. He poked his head out of his blowgun to see if the sun had risen. It hadn't. Camazotz took his head. Not slowly, not with warning. A single pass. The death bat swept down and severed Hunahpu's head from his body with one stroke of its snout, the way a sickle passes through a stalk of corn. The head flew. The body stayed in the blowgun. The lords of death took the head and hung it in the ball court, the way they had hung the twins' father's head in the calabash tree. History repeating, the way it does in Xibalba, which is a place where everything that has happened is always happening. But the story doesn't end there, because the hero twins are tricksters. Xbalanque, the younger twin, the cleverer one, the one who thought second and moved second and survived because of it, called to the animals for help. A turtle came. They carved it into the shape of Hunahpu's head and placed it on his brother's shoulders. It worked. Not perfectly, not the way a real head works, but well enough to walk into the ball court and challenge the Lords of Death to one more game. During the game, a rabbit, placed by Xtabay, ran across the court. The Lords of Death were distracted. Xtabay grabbed his brother's real head from the wall, replaced the turtle, and Hunahpu was whole again. They won the game. But more than that, they defeated the Lords of Death by dying. The twins allowed themselves to be killed. They lay down in the fire, and their bones were ground to dust, and the dust was thrown in the river. But they came back. 5 days later, they appeared as two wandering performers, ragged, anonymous, and they performed miracles. They killed a dog and brought it back to life. They burned a house and rebuilt it from the ash. They sacrificed each other and rose again. The Lords of Death were fascinated. "Do that to us," they said. "Sacrifice us. Bring us back." The twins obliged. They sacrificed the Lords of Death. And they did not bring them back. That was the trick. The oldest trick. Make the powerful ask for the thing that destroys them. They brought their father back, not to life, but to the sky. He became the maize god, reborn with every harvest, dying and returning the way corn dies and returns, forever. But the House of Bats is still there. The sixth trial. The one that proves patience isn't enough. The one that says, "Don't look, not yet. Don't check whether the dark is over. The dark will tell you when it's done." The death bats are still circling. Camazotz is still waiting for someone to look up too soon. The lake was still. Not the kind of still that means nothing is happening. The kind of still that means something is being very careful. The Aztecs kept careful records of the natural world. The Florentine Codex, compiled from interviews with Aztec elders by the Spanish friar Sahagún, catalogues animals the way a modern field guide catalogues animals. Physical description, habitat, behavior, danger level. Between the entry for the otter and the entry for a particular kind of water snake, there is an entry for something called the Ahuizotl. It is not filed under mythology. It is not filed under legend. It is filed under animals that live in the water. Barret Ahuizotl is small, about the size of a dog or a large otter. It has dark, waterproof fur. Its body is compact and low to the ground and built for moving through water the way a seal's body is built for water. Not awkward in it, but native to it. Its paws are like a monkey's hands, dexterous, capable of gripping. Its ears are pointed. Its teeth are sharp. And it has a tail. The tail is long, longer than the body, flexible, prehensile, and at the end of the tail, not a tuft, not a barb. A hand. A human hand. 5 fingers. A thumb that can grip. The hand on the end of the Ahuizotl's tail is the hand of a person, attached to the body of something that is not a person at all. It lived in lakes and rivers and the deep canals that connected the cities of the Valley of Mexico. It preferred the places where the water was deep enough to hide in and the bank was close enough to reach. It was a servant of Tlaloc, the rain god, the god of water and storms, and the particular kind of plenty that comes only when the rain falls at the right time in the right amount. Tlaloc was generous, and Tlaloc was terrible, and the Ahuizotl was his collector. The Ahuizotl hunted by crying. It could mimic the sound of a child, not a child playing, a child in distress, a child lost, a child calling for help from the water's edge in the kind of voice that makes a person move before they think. A fisherman at his canoe hears a child crying near the reeds. A woman washing clothes downstream hears a small voice calling from the bank. A farmer walking home at dusk hears what sounds like a boy who has fallen into the canal. They go to help. They step into the water. The water is cold at the edges, colder than it should be, colder than the air, as if the temperature itself were a boundary, and crossing it meant something. But they don't stop. A child is crying. The instinct to help a child is older than instinct itself. It's the instruction set that keeps the species alive. And the Ahuizotl knows this, and uses it the way a hunter uses a call. They reach toward the sound. The tail comes up from below. The hand on the end of the tail grips the ankle, or the wrist, or the belt. It doesn't matter where it grips, because the grip doesn't let go. The Ahuizotl is small, but the water is deep. And a small creature in deep water has every advantage over a large creature that needs to breathe. The victims drowned. That was the method. Not violence exactly. Not the way a jaguar kills or a warrior kills. The Ahuizotl simply held you under until the water did the rest. But what happened to the body is what the Aztecs found most significant. The bodies of people taken by the Ahuizotl were found, when they were found, missing specific things. Their eyes, their teeth, their fingernails. Not torn out, not damaged by the water or by fish, or by the ordinary work of decomposition. Removed, precisely, as if taken on purpose by something that knew what it wanted and took only that. These were offerings, gifts for Tlaloc. The eyes so the rain god could see, the teeth so the rain god could eat, the fingernails. The Aztecs believed fingernails were connected to the soul. The Ahuizotl was taking the most personal parts of a person and delivering them to the god who controlled the rain. The bodies themselves were sacred. Anyone killed by the Ahuizotl was considered chosen. Their bodies could not be touched by ordinary people. Only priests could handle the dead. The family could not mourn in the usual way. Grief, in this case, was a kind of blasphemy. You don't grieve a gift. The curious thing about the Ahuizotl is how seriously the Aztecs took it. It wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a ghost story told to frighten children away from the water, although it did that too. It was an animal. It had a habitat. It had feeding patterns. It had a relationship with a god that was as specific and as documented as the relationship between bees and flowers. The elders who described it to Sahagun described it the way they described jaguars and quetzals and the axolotl, another water creature from the lakes of Mexico that Europeans also assumed was fictional until they found it. The axolotl, another water creature from the lakes of Mexico, was a myth too, until someone found one. The Aztec elders were describing what they knew. Whether what they knew has a Latin name or not is a question about taxonomy, not about truth. There is a detail the Florentine Codex includes that no other source mentions as directly. The Ahuizotl weeps. When it has taken a victim and delivered the offerings to Tlaloc, it surfaces and makes a sound that Sahagun's informants described as crying. Not the mimicked child's cry that is the lure, the weapon, the thing it uses. This sound is different. This sound, the elders said, is the Ahuizotl's own voice. What it mourns, if it mourns, is not recorded. Perhaps it grieves the way any collector grieves, knowing that each delivery only satisfies the god until the next time. Perhaps it grieves for the drowned. Perhaps there is no grief, and the sound is something else entirely. Satisfaction, or the particular loneliness of a creature that serves a god no one else can see. The lakes are mostly gone now. Tenochtitlan's lake was drained centuries ago. Mexico City sits on its dry bed. Whatever lived in those waters has moved deeper, or farther, or nowhere at all. But rivers still move through the dark, and sometimes, by a canal or a creek or a reservoir, someone hears a child crying near the water's edge, and something in them tells them, don't go. In the villages around Tlaxcala, a state in central Mexico, east of Mexico City, in the shadow of the volcanoes, there is a kind of witch that is not made, but born. She doesn't choose it. She doesn't seek it out. There is no pact with a devil, no forbidden book, no midnight ritual at a crossroads. The Tlahuelpuchi is born with the curse, the way some people are born left-handed. It's in the blood. It runs in families, and there is nothing anyone can do about it. The first sign comes around puberty. A girl of 12 or 13 begins to feel something she cannot describe to anyone. A restlessness. A hunger that ordinary food doesn't touch. A pull toward the dark that starts as discomfort and becomes need. She doesn't know what she is. Not yet. But her body knows. The transformation. The Tlahuelpuchi goes to a room where no one can see. She builds a fire, a specific kind of fire, with specific wood, and she begins to detach. Her legs come off. Not violently, not with blood or sound or tearing, The body separates at the waist, the way a reflection separates from the person making it, cleanly, completely, as if the connection between upper and lower had only ever been provisional. The legs remain standing, upright, by the fire, waiting for the rest of the body to come back. The top half, the head, the arms, the torso, transforms into a bird, usually a turkey, sometimes an owl, sometimes a vulture, a bird large enough to fly, but common enough not to be noticed. And she flies, out of the house, over the village, looking for what she needs. What she needs is blood. Not the blood of adults, not the blood of animals, the blood of infants. Specifically, children between 3 and 10 months old, because that blood, according to the tradition, is the most sustaining, the most alive. She enters the house through the gap under the door, through a window left open, through the space between the thatch and the wall. Any opening that a bird can pass through, the Tlahuelpuchi can pass through. She doesn't bite. That's not how it works. The feeding is described as a kind of breathing. She hovers over the child and draws the blood out through the mouth, through the nose, through the pores of the skin. A slow extraction. The child doesn't wake. The child doesn't cry. The child simply becomes less alive over the course of the night. There is a specific ritual she must perform before each feeding. She walks in a cross pattern, north to south, east to west, over the roof of the house where the child sleeps. This is not optional. The curse demands it. The cross pattern is the marker. It tells whatever power governs the Tlahuelpuchi that this feeding is sanctioned, that the debt is being paid, that the curse is functioning as intended. If the parents are awake, they might hear it. A soft scratching on the roof tiles, a pattern of footsteps that moves in a shape no animal would walk. By the time they understand what the sound means, she is already inside. In the morning, the parents find a child that won't wake up. Bruises on the chest or the neck. No other explanation. No fever. No illness. No sign that anything entered the room, except a faint smell. Something animal. Something that doesn't belong in a house where a child sleeps. The worst part of the Tlahuelpuchi is not what she does, it's where she lives. She lives at home, with her family. She eats dinner with them. She goes to market. She attends church. She has a mother, siblings, perhaps a husband, who doesn't know, or who knows and cannot say. Because the family of a Tlahuelpuchi is bound by a rule older than any rule the church brought. You cannot expose her. If a family member reveals the Tlahuelpuchi to the village, the curse does not lift. It transfers to the person who spoke, or to another family member, or to a child not yet born. The The curse stays in the bloodline. The only way to keep it contained is silence. So the family watches. They know what she is. They hear her leave at night. They see her legs standing by the fire, and they do not touch them. Because if you move the legs, she cannot reattach, and she dies. And the curse moves to someone else in the family. They live with a predator. They set a place for her at the table. They watch her hold their children during the day, and they lock the doors that won't stop her at night. The protections are specific. Garlic, but not in the European way, placed on the windowsills and around the child's crib. Onions, shiny metal objects which are said to confuse her. An open pair of scissors beneath the crib points out, forming a cross. But the most effective protection, according to Nutini's fieldwork in Tlaxcala, is also the simplest. Don't leave the child alone. The Tlahuelpuchi cannot feed if someone is watching. Awareness itself is a ward. There is one more thing. The Tlahuelpuchi cannot feed from the same family twice in a row. Each month, a different house, a different child. The curse rotates through the village, the way a disease rotates. No household is safe forever, but no household is targeted twice before the circle completes. This means the Tlahuelpuchi knows every family in the village. She has been in every house. She knows which doors stick, and which windows don't close properly, and which mothers are heavy sleepers, and which ones aren't. She has studied them, the way a person studies a problem they didn't ask for, but cannot avoid. And the families, in turn, know that one of them is her, but not which one. The suspicion is distributed evenly across every woman in the village who lives quietly, who keeps to herself, who has an unexplained absence now and then. The curse poisons not just the children it feeds on, but the trust between every household that might be harbouring it. The tradition is still active. In rural Tlaxcala, families still take precautions. Anthropologists documented cases as recently as the 1990s where infant deaths were attributed to Tlahuelpuchi attacks, and the community responded, not with doctors, but with vigilance, watching the night, watching the neighbours, watching the birds that fly too low over the rooftops after midnight. She's someone you know. She always has been. The saber tree is the tallest thing in the Yucatan. It grows straight up out of the thin limestone soil and doesn't stop until it's taller than anything around it. 40 meters, 50. The trunk studded with thorns like a column wrapped in barbed wire. The roots spreading in every direction like fingers gripping the ground against something trying to pull the whole tree under. The Maya call it Yakshe, the green tree, the first tree, the tree that stands at the center of the world. Its roots go down into Xibalba. Its trunk passes through the human world. Its branches reach into the sky, where the gods live. The saber is the axis, the hinge, the place where all three levels of existence can reach each other. Nothing good comes from standing beneath a saber tree at night. The story begins with two sisters. They lived in a small pueblo in the Yucatan, a village of a few dozen families where everyone knew everyone and everyone had an opinion about everyone else. The first sister was called Xtabay. She was beautiful. She was also, by the standards of the village, a disgrace. She took lovers freely. She didn't hide it. She didn't apologize for it. The village called her names and crossed the street when she walked past and told their children not to be like her. The village had a word for her, and it was not a kind word. They spoke it behind her back and sometimes to her face, and she absorbed it the way a stone absorbs rain, not breaking, not softening, just darkening a little. But Xtabay did something else. She fed the sick. She took care of animals that no one else would touch. The mangy dogs, the injured birds, the creatures that had been abandoned because they were no longer useful. She gave what she had to people who had less, without telling anyone, without expecting thanks. The second sister was called Ahuizotl. She was virtuous. By every measure the village used, she was impeccable, proper, well-dressed, attended church, never a scandal, never a whisper. The village held her up as everything a woman should be. But Ahuizotl had no warmth. She looked at the sick and saw inconvenience. She looked at the poor and saw failure. She kept everything clean and everything ordered and everything at a distance, because distance was how she survived a world that she found fundamentally beneath her. Xtabay died first. The village barely noticed. A few people came to bury her. No ceremony, no procession, just a body in the ground and the faint relief of people who no longer have to deal with someone who embarrassed them. But in the morning, the grave was covered in flowers. Wild flowers, the kind that have no name, the kind that grow where they want and smell like something you dreamed but can't remember clearly. The air above the grave was sweet. People passing on the road stopped and couldn't say why. When Ahuizotl heard about the flowers, she was furious. If a woman like Xtabay could produce flowers from her grave, then surely Ahuizotl's death would produce something magnificent. Surely virtue would be rewarded more generously than sin. Ahuizotl died. Her funeral was large. The whole village came. The priest spoke well. Everything's proper. From her grave grew a cactus, thorny, without scent, the kind of plant that offers nothing and asks to be left alone. Ahuizotl could not accept it. Even in death, she burned with the injustice of it. That Xtabay, the sinner, the scandal, was loved by the earth, and she was not. And so she did what the jealous dead do in every tradition that takes the dead seriously. She made a deal. She called on Kisin, the lord of the dead, the keeper of the deepest level of Xibalba, and she asked to come back. Not as herself, as something better, something beautiful, something that would be loved the way Xtabay was loved. Kissin obliged. He always does. That's the nature of the deal. You get exactly what you asked for. And the cost is everything you didn't think to protect. Xtabay came back as the Xtabay. Beautiful. Heart-stoppingly beautiful. Long dark hair that moves even when there's no wind. A white dress that catches the moonlight and seems to glow. She stands beneath the sabre tree, at the place where the roots are thickest, where the thorns are sharpest, at the exact point where the human world and the underworld are closest together. And she waits. She waits for men, specifically for men who are drunk, or lost, or both. Men walking alone on the roads between villages after dark, after the cantina has closed, after the last friend has gone home. She appears to them as the most beautiful woman they have ever seen. Not a stranger, something more intimate than that. The Xtabay looks like whatever you have been missing, whatever you've been walking toward without knowing it. She is the shape your loneliness takes when it finally has a body. She calls to them. She beckons. She leads them into the thorns of the sabre, and deeper into the root system, into the place where the tree meets the ground, and the ground meets Xibalba. Some are found in the morning, tangled in the sabre's roots, torn by its thorns, unconscious, or dead, or mad, unable to explain where they went, or what they followed, or why their clothes are shredded, and their hands are bleeding, and their eyes won't focus on anything in the present tense. Some are never found at all. The survivors, the ones who wake up bleeding in the sabre roots and stagger home, all report the same thing. She was beautiful. She smelled like flowers. She said exactly the thing they most wanted to hear. And at a certain point, a point they can never precisely identify, the beauty turned. The woman became something else. The face shifted. The flowers smelled like rot, and the roots of the sabre were already around them. By the time they understood that what they had followed was not desire, but hunger wearing desire's face. In some villages, men who survive an encounter with the Xtabay are never quite the same. They lose interest in their wives, in their work, in the ordinary textures of being alive. Something was taken from them in the sabre roots, not their life, but their capacity to want anything that isn't her. The Xtabay is not angry, that's the thing. She's not vengeful in the way ghosts are vengeful. She wanted to be loved. She wanted what Xtabay had. But Kissin gave her beauty without warmth, desire without connection, the appearance of love without any of its substance. She got exactly what she asked for. That's the horror. The forest does not belong to you. This is not a metaphor or an environmentalist slogan. In the Nahua understanding of the world, the forest has owners, and the owners are watching. And the owners have opinions about whether you should be here. They are called Chaneques. The word means inhabitants of dangerous places, which is less a name than a warning. They are small, the size of children, or smaller. Some descriptions say knee-high. They look like people, but not exactly like people. The proportions are slightly wrong. The face is a little too old for the body. The feet point the wrong direction, or they have no feet at all, depending on who you ask. They live in the deep parts of the forest, in caves, by rivers, near cliffs, in the places that humans usually avoid, the places where the footing is uncertain, and the canopy is too thick for sunlight, and the sounds are wrong. They have been seen sitting on roots, combing each other's hair with combs made from fishbone. They have been heard laughing in places where nobody is laughing. They move through the underbrush without breaking branches, the way a fish moves through water, not around things, but through the spaces between them, as if the forest opens for them and closes behind them. And a human, following the same path, would find only thorns. The Chaneques are guardians, servants of Tlaloc, the rain god, and protectors of the animals, the water, the plants, the rocks, the soil, everything in the forest that was here before people arrived and will be here after people leave. They are not evil. This is important. The Chaneques are not monsters. They don't hunt, they don't prey, they respond. Treat the forest with respect, leave offerings, ask permission, take only what you need, announce yourself when you enter, and the Chaneques will protect you too. They'll guide you home if you're lost. They'll keep the snakes away. They'll make sure your harvest is good and your water is clean, and the jaguars stay on their side of the ridge. But enter the forest without asking. Take what isn't offered, damage what isn't yours, or simply walk through with the particular arrogance of someone who believes they are the most important thing in any given space. And the Chaneques will take your soul. Not kill you, not hurt you, take your soul. The tradition describes it as a kind of fright. The Chaneques appear suddenly, or make a sound, or shift the path so you're somewhere you weren't, and the shock of it knocks the soul out of the body. The soul falls. It drops from the body like a ripe fruit from a branch, silently, completely, and the person standing there doesn't even feel it leave. The Chaneques catch it before it hits the ground and carry it deep into the forest, down into the root systems where the trees drink, and bury it in the dark earth. They don't destroy it. That's the cruelty and the mercy. The soul isn't gone. It's kept, stored in the cool dark like a seed that might sprout or might not, depending on whether anyone comes looking for it before the earth absorbs it completely. The person doesn't die. Not immediately. They walk home, they cross their own doorstep, they sit at their own table. Their family looks at them and sees the same face, The same hands, the same voice, the same way of tilting the head when they're listening. But something is different. The family can feel it, the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. The absence has a shape. They eat, they sleep, but something is wrong. They're tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. They can't concentrate. Food doesn't taste right. They start getting sick. Fevers, aches, a general decline that doesn't respond to medicine. Because medicine treats the body, and the body isn't what's broken. Without intervention, the person dies. Not of anything a doctor can name, of absence, of the slow withdrawal of whatever it is that makes being alive different from just existing. The cure is specific. A curandero, a healer, someone who knows the old medicine, must go to the place in the forest where the soul was taken. They must make offerings, copal incense, food, tobacco, sweet things. They must ask the Chaneques, not demand, ask, to return what they took. Sometimes the Chaneques agree. Sometimes they don't. It depends on what the trespass was, and how angry they are, and whether the offerings are good enough to compensate for whatever was done. There are stories of people who went years without their soul. They functioned. They worked in the fields. They spoke when spoken to. But they didn't laugh, and they didn't dream. And when they looked at the people they loved, there was a flatness in their gaze that made the people they loved look away first. Living without a soul is not like dying. It's like being a photograph of yourself. Accurate, detailed, two-dimensional. The traditional protection is simpler than the cure. Before entering the forest, turn your clothing inside out. The reversed fabric confuses the Chaneques. They can't read your intentions if everything about you is backward. In communities across Veracruz and Oaxaca, people still leave offerings before entering dense forest. A handful of seeds, a splash of mezcal on the ground, words spoken, not to anyone visible, but to the place itself, an acknowledgement that the place was listening before you arrived, and will be listening long after you leave. The forest was listening before you arrived. It will be listening long after you leave. Every person has an animal. Not a pet, not a preference, not the animal you'd choose if someone asked you at a party which animal you identify with. In the Mesoamerican tradition, the connection is deeper than choice and older than language. When a child is born, ashes are spread on the ground outside the house. In the morning, the footprints left in the ash reveal which animal the child is bound to. Paw prints, claw marks, the trail of something that came to meet its other half in the night. This is the tonal. your animal double, your counterpart, the creature whose life runs parallel to yours. When it thrives, you thrive. When it's injured, you feel it. When it dies, you die too. Most people never see their tonal. It lives its own life, somewhere in the mountains or the forest, going about its animal business, unaware, or perhaps deeply aware, of the human whose heartbeat matches its own. There are stories of men who felt a sudden pain in their shoulder and learned later that a jaguar in the hills had been wounded at the same hour. Stories of women who dreamed of running through tall grass on 4 legs and woke with mud between their toes. The connection is not symbolic. It is physiological. What happens to one happens to the other, through a mechanism the tradition doesn't explain, because the tradition doesn't consider it mysterious. The sky is blue. Water is wet. You and your animal are the same creature, living 2 lives. But some people can become theirs. The Nagual is a person who has learned to cross. Not metaphorically, not in a dream or a vision or a drug-induced trance. Although those can be doorways, the Nagual physically transforms. A person becomes a jaguar. A person becomes an owl. A person becomes a coyote, or a snake, or a dog, and moves through the world with the animal's body and the person's mind. The tradition is morally ambiguous. Some Naguals are healers. They use the transformation to travel where human bodies can't go, to find lost children, to scout for danger, to speak with the animal world on behalf of the human one. In some communities, the Nagual is the protector, the one who watches the boundaries while everyone else sleeps. But some Naguals are predators. There was a village. There is always a village in these stories, because the Nagual only matters in a place small enough that everyone knows each other, and the betrayal is personal. The livestock were dying, not from disease, not from drought. Something was killing them at night. Goats, chickens, a calf. The kills were clean, teeth marks, but not the scattered mess of a wild animal feeding. Something deliberate. Something that took what it wanted and left the rest. The farmers tried the ordinary explanations first. A stray dog. A coyote from the ridgeline. A neighbour's animal that had broken loose. They checked the fences. They reinforced the pens. They did what practical people do, before admitting that the practical explanations have run out. But the kills continued, and they were too clean, too selective. A wild predator takes what's closest. A wild predator doesn't choose the fattest goat, leave the thin one, and close the gate behind it. The men set watches. They stayed up through the night with machetes and dogs. One night, in the hour before dawn, a hunter saw it, a jaguar, moving along the edge of the pens with a caution that didn't match a wild animal's behaviour. Wild jaguars don't check the gate. Wild jaguars don't pause to look at the house before moving on. He shot at it. The jaguar screamed. Not a jaguar's scream, something wrong in the register, something too high, and ran. A trail of blood led into the forest, and then stopped. In the morning, the village healer had a wound on his arm, the same place the jaguar had been hit, the same side, the same depth. No one said anything. Not at first. The healer was respected. He had cured their children's fevers. He had set broken bones. He knew which plants to use for snakebite, and which for grief, and which for the kind of illness that medicine doesn't touch. He was not a stranger. He was theirs. And that was the problem, because the Nagual is never an outsider. The Nagual is always someone you've shared meals with, someone whose children play with yours, someone who has sat with you during a loss and said the right things and meant them, and then gone home and become something else entirely. The village confronted him, or they didn't. In some versions of this story, the healer leaves voluntarily, walks into the forest, and doesn't come back, choosing the animal life over the human one. In other versions, he's killed. In others, he simply moves to another village where nobody knows. The question the tradition leaves open is not whether he was guilty. He was. The blood doesn't lie. In the version where he stays, the village does something worse than banish him. They keep him. They let him continue to heal their children, because nobody else knows the plants, and nobody else can set a bone the way he can. But they watch him now. Every night, someone is awake, and the healer knows that every patient he touches is also studying him, looking for the yellow in his eyes, the calluses on hands that might be paws, the particular way he tilts his head when he listens that is more animal than human. He becomes two things at once, permanently, not because he transforms at night, but because the village will never see him as one thing again. The question is whether you blame the man or the animal, whether the jaguar was something he chose or something he was, whether the transformation released something already inside him or made him into something new. The tradition persists. In Oaxaca, in Chiapas, in the highland communities where the old language is still spoken alongside Spanish, the Nagual is not history, it's current. Anthropologists conducting fieldwork in the late 20th century found communities where the ash ritual is still performed for newborns, where families still speak of a cousin or an uncle who could do things that people shouldn't be able to do, where the word Nagual is spoken the way a person speaks any ordinary fact about the world they live in. The Nagual tradition says everyone has a second nature. Most people never meet theirs. The lucky ones. The footprints in the ash were there from the beginning. Before the earth existed, there was water. Not an ocean in the way you imagine an ocean, with shores and a bottom and a horizon. Water without boundary. Water in every direction. Water above and water below, and no difference between them. And in the water, there was Cipactli. The Aztecs described her as a crocodile, but that's insufficient. She was part crocodile, part fish, part toad, a creature assembled from the worst parts of everything that lives in water, scaled and fanged and impossibly large. And she was hungry. Not hungry the way an animal is hungry, periodically, manageably, satisfied by a meal. Cipactli was hungry the way a void is hungry, permanently. At every joint of her body, every elbow, every knee, every place where one segment met another, there was a mouth. Mouths at the shoulders, mouths at the hips, mouths along the tail. Every joint was an opening that wanted to close around something. She ate everything that came near her, not because she needed to, because that was what she was. Appetite, given a body and set loose in the dark. The gods had a problem. Tezcatlipoca, the smoking mirror, god of night and sorcery and the particular kind of chaos that makes new things possible, and Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, god of wind and knowledge and civilization. These two needed to make a world, but every time they tried, whatever they created sank into the water, and Cipactli ate it. You can't build a world on top of something that devours everything that touches it. The only solution was to use the devourer itself. They had to kill Cipactli. But Cipactli was vast and hungry, and the water was hers. They needed bait. Tezcatlipoca offered his foot, not as a trick, not as a lure that would be pulled back at the last moment. He put his foot into the water and let Cipactli take it. She bit it off. The god of chaos sacrificed a part of himself to draw the monster close enough to be destroyed. This is why Tezcatlipoca is always depicted with one foot missing, replaced by a smoking obsidian mirror. The first sacrifice in a cosmos that would be built on sacrifice. They tore her apart. Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl took Cipactli's body and ripped it in two. From the upper half, they made the sky. From the lower half, they made the earth. The violence of it was not incidental. It was the point. The Aztecs understood that creation is not gentle. Nothing new comes into existence without something old being destroyed. The world was not spoken into being by a serene voice. It was ripped from the body of a screaming monster by two gods who were willing to get their hands bloody because nothing else would work. Her spine became the mountains. Her skin became the ground. Her hair became the trees and the grass. Her eyes became the cenotes, the sinkholes, the wells, the places where water rises from underground. Her mouth became the caves, the openings in the earth where the dark goes down and keeps going, past the reach of daylight, past the reach of sound, past the reach of any sense that tells a person they are in a place meant for the living. Her ribs became the valleys. Her joints, those joints that each held a mouth, became the fault lines. The fractures in the crust, where the earth moves against itself and the mouths still open and close in the slow rhythm of a hunger that has not diminished by being distributed across the entire surface of the world. The earth you walk on is her body. The mountains you look at are her bones. The rivers that run through the valleys are her blood, still moving, still warm. And she is still alive. That is the part of the story that matters most. Cipactli was not killed. She was transformed. The earth is not her corpse. The earth is her prison. She is still conscious, still hungry, still aware in whatever way a creature with mouths at every joint is aware that she has been torn apart and everything alive is living on her body without asking permission. The gods understood this. They felt her anger in the earthquakes. They heard her hunger in the droughts. They knew that a world made from a living creature's body would need to feed that creature forever. And so the gods decreed blood. The earth must be fed. Cipactli must be given blood to sustain the land made from her flesh. The harvests grow because she allows it. The rain falls because Tlaloc negotiates with her. But the arrangement is not free. Nothing is free in a cosmos that began with a god losing his foot. The other gods saw what Tezcatlipoca and Quetzalcoatl had done, and they wept. Not for Cipactli, for the world, because a world built from a creature in pain would be a world that carries that pain in its foundation. Every earthquake would be her shifting. Every drought would be her closing her mouths and refusing to give. Every flood would be her blood rising through the soil, to remind the living that the ground they trust is not ground. It's flesh. The Aztecs did not find this horrifying. They found it honest. A world that pretends to be stable, that tells you the ground is solid and the mountains are permanent and the rivers run because physics says so. That world is a lie. The truth is simpler and worse. Everything alive is living on something else's body, and the body hasn't consented, and the arrangement can end at any time. This is the debt at the bottom of the Aztec world. The earth is alive, and the earth is hungry, and the earth will eat you eventually, whether you pay the debt or not. The sacrifice just buys time. And the Aztecs knew what it meant to live on borrowed time. They had a calendar that predicted the end of the world. Not once, repeatedly. The world had ended 4 times already. 4 suns had risen and fallen. Each time the debt grew too heavy, the world collapsed and was rebuilt from what remained. And Cipactli's body absorbed the ruins and waited for the next attempt. We are living in the 5th sun. The Aztecs were explicit about this. This world, too, will end. The earthquakes will grow until the mountains fold. The mouths at every joint will open one final time, and whatever comes next will be built again on the back of something that did not agree to carry it. The ground beneath you is dreaming. Try not to wake it. When you die, not in battle, not by drowning, not in childbirth, not struck by lightning, but in the ordinary way, in bed, of age or illness, or the slow accumulation of being alive long enough, you go to Mictlan. Mictlan is the underworld, not hell, not a punishment. The Aztec dead are not judged. Nobody asks what you did, or whether you were good, or whether you said the right prayers. Mictlan is where most people go, because most people die in ordinary ways, and ordinary deaths have an ordinary destination. But the road there takes 4 years. The first obstacle is a river, a wide river called Apanohuaya, the crossing place. Deep water, fast current, no bridge, no ford, no way across for a soul that has just left its body and doesn't yet understand the rules of being dead. This is where the dog waits. The Tlahuelpuchi, the hairless dog of Mexico, warm-skinned, black or dark-spotted, ancient beyond breed, older than the Aztecs themselves. Every family raised one. When a person died, a Tlahuelpuchi was cremated alongside them, not as a sacrifice, but as a guide. The dog's job was to carry the dead across the river. Archaeologists have found them together, human burials and dog burials, side by side, in graves that are hundreds of years old. The arrangement is literal. The dog was not a symbol. The dog was transport. But the dog only carries people it recognizes. If you mistreated dogs in life, if you were cruel to them, if you kicked them, if you didn't feed them when they came to your door, the dog at the river would not carry you. You would stand at the bank forever. Beyond the river, the clashing mountains. 2 mountains that slam together like doors. The dead must pass between them at the moment they separate and before they close again. The timing is everything. Too slow and you are crushed. Too fast and you miss the opening. The dead must learn patience and decisiveness simultaneously, which is, if you think about it, what living well required too. Then, the obsidian wind, a place where the wind carries knives. Not figuratively. Obsidian blades, the same volcanic glass the Aztecs used for weapons and surgery, riding a wind that strips flesh from bone. The living body has already been left behind, but the soul still feels. The journey to Mictlan is not painless, just because you're dead. The dead learn this at the obsidian wind. They learn that death is not the end of suffering, but a change in its character. In life, pain is a signal. Pull your hand from the fire, rest the broken leg. The body telling itself what to do differently. In Mictlan, pain has no purpose. Nothing can be protected. Nothing can be saved. The wind cuts, and the dead walk through it, because walking through it is the only direction available. 9 levels, 4 years. The dead pass through a place where arrows fly, a place where a great lizard eats hearts, a place of salt and ice, a place where flags snap in a wind that never stops. Each level strips something away. A fear, a memory, an attachment to the world above that the dead person carried with them, like a stone in a pocket that gets heavier the farther you walk. The dead were not alone on this road. Others walked ahead and behind. A procession of the ordinary dead, stretching back to the beginning of the world and forward to its end. The merchant who died in his sleep. The grandmother who simply stopped one afternoon, like a fire that runs out of wood. The child who caught a fever and burned through it in 3 days. All of them walking. All of them carrying whatever they could not let go of. The memory of a particular meal. The sound of a dog barking at dawn. The feeling of a hand held for the last time, without knowing it was the last time. The offerings the living sent helped with the obstacles. Clothing to wear through the knife wind. Food for the parts of the road where hunger becomes another kind of cutting. The jade bead in the mouth. Payment. Toll. The currency of the dead that buys passage. The way coins on the eyes paid Charon in the Greek tradition. Different cultures, same understanding. Dying is not free. The journey is a shedding. The dead arrive at each level carrying less than they carried at the level before. By the end, there is nothing left but the essential thing, whatever it is that persists after everything portable has been removed. At the 9th level, Mictlan waits, the Lord of the Dead. He sits on a throne of bones, in a room so deep underground that the concept of underground has stopped meaning anything. There is no above from here. There is no direction that leads back. The 9th level is the end of direction. He is a skeleton adorned with human bones and owl feathers. His wife, Mictlan, beside him, the Lady of the Dead, whose festival would eventually become Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, when the living set a place at the table for the people they've lost, and pretend, or don't pretend, that the dead come back to eat and drink and sit in their old chair for one night. Mictlan does not judge. He receives. The dead arrive, having walked 4 years through everything the underworld could throw at them. And the Lord of the Dead looks at what's left and says, "Rest." That's it. Not heaven, not punishment, not reincarnation. Rest. The simple, enormous gift of not having to walk anymore. The Aztecs did not fear Mictlan. They feared the journey. They feared the obsidian wind and the clashing mountains and the river without a dog. But Mictlan itself, the destination, the 9th level, the place where walking ends, was not a threat. It was a fact. The way gravity is a fact. Not cruel. Not kind. Just the direction everything eventually goes. They prepared for it practically. The dog. The offerings. The jade bead placed in the mouth of the dead to pay for the crossing. The prayers not for salvation, but for endurance. Give the dead strength for the journey, not exemption from it. Because in the Aztec understanding of death, there are no exemptions. There is only the road, and what you carry, and how much of it you're willing to set down. The road is long, but the road ends, and at the end, it's quiet. The stone is cold now. The stories are done. If you're still awake, I'm impressed. If you drifted somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the water, or the forest, or the underworld, that's exactly right. That's what the dark was for. The Mesoamerican world was built from sacrifice. The gods gave their blood to make the sun move. Tlaxcala gave his foot to bait a monster. The dead give 4 years to reach the place where walking ends. Everything costs something, but the payment buys rest. And rest, in the end, is what the dead and the living have in common. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. We'll be back. Sleep well.